Sounds good.
Okay. All right. We're now officially live. So, a few things. A lot has happened since I last had you on.
Yes, it
For
is.
starters, now you show your face.
I do. Yes, I do.
So, what inspired that change? What inspired that decision?
So I mean, I haven't really gone too in depth with the face stuff yet, but I just I kind of noticed that some YouTube channels are okay getting away with being faceless, but um I've noticed that people tend to gravitate towards a personality more, you know? It's uh it's a lot easier to identify with someone, or yeah, just identify with someone if you can see them, you know. So um I thought, there's a few new video ideas that I have that I want to get started. Um and it'd be beneficial for me to be on camera for those. So that, the new video ideas, plus, I just think in general people are more interested when they can connect with someone more. I thought it might be a good idea to shift to doing some more on camera stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, because I remember when we first did this, you were just the eye.
Yes.
You were just the eye, the eldritch monster. I don't know what to call it. Where did that come from? Because that's yours, right? You made that, if I'm not mistaken.
So I didn't draw that, but I had it commissioned. My original logo was just like, it actually was like an eye that looked like the eye you'd find on a psychic energy from Pokemon, like the Pokemon card game. And I had like a red and white gradient behind it with the vile eye under it. So that was my little. I don't really do graphic design. I can't draw worth a damn. So I commissioned someone to make that for me, and always been I've always liked like monsters. Like do you know what a beholder is from Dungeons and Dragons?
No, not familiar.
So it's like a eye monster with tentacles, and there's a couple other ones that in games I've played and stuff that I've always liked. So I thought that'd be pretty cool to have as a logo for the Violi, and that's what ended up happening.
Right. Well, now going forward, like in time, just from the eye and the face reveal, because I also wanted to say that I think originally one of the first things I remember with your face being shown was it was your wife, I think, wishing you happy birthday in the Discord server, if I'm not mistaken. Or that was because I remember that, and I'm like, wait, he showed his face, like that's him. It was like kind of a bad photo because it was all dark, so I couldn't get a good look at it. But if I'm not mistaken, that was the first time, or was there a time before that I wasn't aware of?
So I did a live stream at 100,000 subs, and back then I wasn't really familiar with how live streams worked on YouTube. So I thought the best thing to do was for me to take it off of YouTube and then re-upload it, like cut down for people to watch. And I took it off, and then I lost the file. So that live stream is now lost to time. But so that was technically the first time that I showed my face, and then I had a sponsor request that I show my face on a video I did for the for Fight Club. So, that was kind of a face reveal, but people don't really sit through a lot of people don't really sit through the sponsor. Most people skip it. So, for the few that saw it, they saw it then, and then I did a podcast with my friends here in town, and I put that a link to it pinned in that video. Um, but other than that, it's been very sporadic. Unless you were there for that live stream, unless you paid attention to the sponsor or you watched that podcast, most people didn't know what I looked like.
Yeah. Well, now it's in like every video that you've been
Yeah.
doing. Yeah,
Right.
which is cool. Where you're sitting on the throne and you're
Yeah, it's cool. Those chairs are actually my wife and I, we bought them because we have a fireplace and we wanted some chairs to put in front of the fireplace, and we were at this consignment furniture store, which is like where people go to sell their old furniture, and they actually, I think they were dining somebody's dining room chairs at one point, and they just happened to look pretty cool. So we bought them, and I was like, "Oh, this would look good for the video. Just sitting in this chair. That'd be pretty cool." And turns out it is. So
I think it fits well. I think
good.
it's good for the ambiance. That makes sense. So, you
Good to
know,
hear.
so yeah, so I was gonna say going forward in the future with what has been going on as more recently. So as many people have probably seen, both from my shout out and from your feature on this video, you were interviewed on Julian's podcast.
Right.
So I called you after it got uploaded too, and I asked you how it was. You said it was awesome, and you guys had in total, I think, an 8-hour discussion because the podcast was 3 hours, plus you said that there was like 5 hours like not even recorded, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, me and him talked. I think we started recording about noon. So right around 4 o'clock, the podcast was over when we took a break here and there, And then I think I stayed at his apartment until like 9. So yeah, we were just talking and hanging out for a while afterwards. He's a great guy.
Yeah, no, he is. And I remember, well, because I went down to Philadelphia to do an interview. Somebody interviewed me, and his name is Chris Antic. He's a good dude. He interviewed Julian actually, and he, I'm trying to think. Yeah, so after I did that podcast with him, the next day I'm like, "Hey, Julian, guess what I did?" And he's like, "What'd you do?" And I told him I got interviewed by the same guy as you, and he's like, "Oh, that's cool." And I remember Julian mentioned he's like, "Yes, I recorded the episode." I'm trying to think. He's was telling me, he's like, yeah, we went into so much detail about like the nature of evil and like all these different things. Super smart guy, super interesting. And I was like, I'm glad to hear. And both of you guys had great things to say. So I'm glad I could help you set that up.
Good to hear, and I thank you for that too.
Yeah. So now I was thinking about this. So not only just before we started the podcast, but I am writing a book.
Oh,
So
good.
yeah, so I'm writing this book, and it's just about different things I've learned and some of the more important things that some of my guests have said that have stuck with me. And the one thing that I wrote that you said was about the root of evil being selfishness.
Okay.
And right before I started recording, I was thinking about where did you come to that conclusion? Like, at what point in like making these videos did you realize like you came to that conclusion?
I'm not sure, honestly. I think I've had that on my mind for at least like 2 years now, so it had to have been sometime like 2 years ago. But, as I was making these videos, um, I had made probably 80 at that point. And, a lot of people, I mean, not a lot of people, but a common saying is, the root of all evil is money. And I probably heard that or something if I started thinking about it myself. And I was just thinking about what all evil actions have in common. And when it comes down to it, they're rooted in something that somebody wants, or wants to do. And they want to do it for themselves. And you can even see that in things that might seem selfless. Like, for example, um, if somebody is committing evil acts for the greater good or for the greater, to promote something in their community, right? They're typically doing those things because they think that it's the best thing to do. They've come to this conclusion that this is what they need to do to make their world a better place. So even when an evil act seems to be done in service to others, you can find its roots in that this is what I want. This is how I think the world should be, and this is what I want. Um, and you can apply that to anything. Why does somebody steal something? Because they want something. They want that thing for X number of reasons. Why do they kill somebody? Because they have whatever reason for doing so that's rooted in their desire to kill that person. Um, yeah, it's just I guess I came to that realization, and I was like, well, that seems to be the case. Um, and I've seen a few people make comments about it, but for the most part, people seem to agree with me. which is nice. That's always nice. But yeah, it just seemed to fit for me that, and I've made the point when I do bring this up in videos, I make sure to state that selfishness isn't evil. It's not evil to be selfish because sometimes we're all selfish. An example I like to give is like if you're having a meal at a restaurant and someone comes by and says, "Hey, give me a bite of that." And you say, "No, this is mine. I bought this food. I bought it with my money." That's technically a selfish thing to do. But it's your food, your money. You bought it with your money. That's your food. You don't have to give that to someone. It's yours. So being selfish isn't necessarily evil, but evil is always selfish, is what I like to say.
Well, here was something I was thinking about too. So, and this is related to the selfishness argument. You reminded me when you said your money, you have the right to keep what you want. My uncle and I got into a debate about because I think I used an example, and he's like, okay, well, you got to like personalize the example, and we started getting onto the discussion of communism, right?
Mhm.
And my argument, we got into the argument of like how much is enough. Would you argue that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatever billionaire you can imagine has more than they need, and unless they commit their lives to altruism or servitude, then they are not in the moral right? And then I'm like, well, to some extent, yes. And he's like, okay, well, then you agree with communist ideals. And I'm like, huh. And it was an interesting point that he had brought up, but it is true because that is the argument that communist dictators make, is that like if you do not dedicate your life to the greater good, so to speak, or community or communal communism, then you're doing something wrong for society. And
Well,
yeah.
I'll keep going. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just asking, like, what would your thoughts be on that, on something like communism, which arguably is dedication to servitude?
Well, the thing about, and see, this is something that I think is a problem in, it's probably a problem in other countries too, but in this country in particular, there's a big problem because for a long time we were, the Cold War that dictated, American policy and American social attitudes and everything. So communism and socialism are like this huge boogeyman, and rightfully so. They've caused horrific things to happen in the world, but especially with older generations, there seems to be a propensity whenever you want to make a small suggestion that could apply to communism, automatically it's just like, whoa, man, what are you doing? That's evil. We don't do that. What are you, a communist? And technically, so in a perfect world, it's true. You know, if you're not dedicating yourself to altruism and helping everyone in the way you can, and people are starving and you're hoarding money, then yes, technically you're in the wrong, right? But the world isn't perfect, so that's the problem. But it's not, I don't think it's wrong to suggest that there are things that need to be fixed that communists would agree with. You know what I mean? It's not a bad thing to have positions that others might agree with. You know what I mean? So for example, if you believed that smoking is, not even just believe, smoking is harmful, and you adopt the position that we should just get rid of smoking altogether, ban smoking everywhere. That's not feasible. We saw what happened with prohibition and everything, but that's, I could understand why people would take that position. If you take that position, technically you agree with Hitler, so because you don't like smoking and Hitler didn't like smoking, does that mean you're a Nazi? No, probably not. If you think that billionaires and rich people shouldn't have as much money as they have, and maybe we should have limits on things like that, you agree with communists, but does that make you a communist? No, I don't think so. And especially in America, and just everywhere in the world, the world has pretty much always been built on the haves having a lot and the have-nots not having as much as the haves. CEOs and other people in power are pretty much modern day kings, and we weren't too keen on monarchies because, kings hoarding all this wealth and living in their castles while everyone is starving isn't the greatest thing in the world. So to suggest that maybe a small number of people having enormous amounts of wealth that they could never hope to spend in 1,000 lifetimes isn't the greatest thing, I don't think that's such a bad position to take. Even if a communist might happen to agree with it, because that doesn't make you a communist. It just means you agree with something that they would agree with too,
Well, there was two things. Number one, my uncle made the point that he once in college got into an argument with a deeply staunch communist, right?
Mm-hmm.
This woman was like the definition of she was a proponent of communist ideals. And my uncle made the argument of, okay, well, why don't you personalize your ideals? She's like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, you have he said to her, he's like, let's just say, how much is your house worth? And she's like, $1 million. And then he's like, okay, well, and you and your husband both have jobs and you make money, and arguably having a $1 million house is more than you need, correct? And then she's like, oh, and then he goes into the point that, why don't, if you truly believe in communism, why don't we start with you, and then you start by selling 33% of all your belongings, and then liquidating them down and then giving them to people in need, like a charity. And then she's like, well, why do I have to be the example? And so that was the first thing. I forgot the second thing I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So there was a philosopher. He still is alive. And I think his name is Peter Singer. I think that's what his name is. And he wrote this paper about how the average person is more evil than you would think. Because so let's just say you see a drowning child in a fountain, right? And you walk by and you do nothing about it. You would agree that's evil, correct?
Sure.
So, right. So Peter's argument was that every day, in some form or another, this happens. And by that, he means not necessarily like a literal, child drowning in a fountain or circumstance, but rather that there are children dying of cancer. There are, with single mothers that are dealing with multiple children that have, disabilities, ailments, that are too poor to deal with it. And they're kind of living paycheck to paycheck, if not, trying to rely on charities to live. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, yourself as a person, right? For example, me, I have, a dresser full of clothes. Do I wear every single one of those clothes all the time? No, I don't. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of clothes in my dresser, for example, that I don't wear. And yet there's people that don't have clothes in the world. Does that make me an evil person? Peter would say yes. And I wanted to bring this up on our last podcast, but I never got the chance to. But it was a really interesting paper because I don't think there's ever been, the video I watched summarizing it said that there's never been like a good argument against what he was saying.
I see. So I agree with him to a certain degree, but I don't know if that's necessarily that everyone is evil. I think it's just that you have to take into account the fact that all of us are living in this world, but at the same time, we're all living in our own worlds. For example, I have 30 different things in my life to worry about on a daily basis, whether that's having to do with my house or my relationship, my family, whatever, right? And so my own worries tend to override the worries of others. I don't think about how a couple miles from here there might be a homeless encampment all the time. I am living my own life, and I do take the time to think about those things or address those things or help people when I can. But, it's the world is a flawed place. And something that I was going to say is it's not, I think you need to look at the fact that in many ways, our value systems have been steered in the wrong direction. For example, in this world, entertainment is highly valued over a lot of things. And who am I to complain? I built my entire channel off of entertainment, right? But you could argue that the world or society's focus on entertainment in rather than, I don't know, helping people in need is wrong. And that's just something that we need to address as a whole and reevaluate what we value over what things we value over other things. Um, but I don't know, people are more evil than you would think. People are more selfish than you think they would be. Um, but to call everyone evil for primarily being concerned with themselves and those closest to them is, I think that's erroneous. Because again, who isn't thinking about what they have going on and who would they have around them more than what else is going on in the world? And something that I said in a recent video, I don't remember which one it was, but um, technically, in America or even just all across the world, a lot of the goods that we use on a daily basis, right? They are derived from exploitation. Maybe your shoes were made in a sweatshop in Vietnam. You don't know. Maybe every piece of clothing you own was made in a sweatshop. Unfortunately, the world has been built on exploitation. It has been for thousands of years now. And technically, I guess the right thing to do would be that we'd all throw out our clothes and protest the fact that people are working in sweatshops to make these clothes. And a radical shift like that could solve that problem, but that's not feasible for pretty much everybody. Not all of us are going to get rid of our clothes all at once and that's going to make everything better. Now we don't have clothes. We need to fix the root of the problem. We don't I think that's one thing that people get caught up a lot is we need to look at the core issue and educate people and make a shift away from things. It's radical change can happen and radical change can be a good thing, but it's just radical changes are just not good overall on a whole for all of society. It's better to acknowledge things that are bad in the world, make gradual changes, and try and shift the conversation towards those things. And it's true that people should be more conscious of suffering and all kinds of things, but I don't know. It's hard for me to say that people are just evil for not constantly being focused on all the wrongs in the world, you know.
Well, let's take, for example, because for me, right, I try not to concern myself with politics in the sense of, you know, bad, good, because the way that I see it is that there's always some hint of corruption in the most powerful of people, always, or 99% of the time. It's very rare that you see somebody in extreme levels of power, whether that be the presidency or, it could be somebody serving under the president, and there's not something inherently selfish or, in the sense of like a self-servitude. They're not using all their powers to do the 100% most moral things. Right. And I think that's for any administration and it's for any political organizations. I think that's fair to say. And with the point of concerning yourself with it is the opposite argument, which is, the argument that I would make is, I don't have the It's not that I don't have the capacity, because I don't want to say I can't, but it's rather that, you know, am I going to try to change every single issue in the world? Right? Am I going to take the time to do that, or am I going to take the time to, because, what am I going to do about this issue? Right? And, that's a fair point. However, the alternate point is that because everybody has that mindset, nothing gets changed.
Right.
So here's, for example, Apple. I have an iPhone, right? So I don't know if you can see it, but I have an iPhone, right?
Right.
However, it is also known that Apple builds nets. I don't know if they do this anymore, and you're probably aware of this fact, but they used to build nets around their factories in China so that if workers attempted suicide, they would jump off into the net so they couldn't
Right.
kill themselves.
Right.
So that's a very dystopic thing. And that's also evil, in the
Mhm.
sense of, rather than addressing the issue and saying, okay, we can't have people work this hard. This is clearly not doing well, and people are attempting suicide. We have to do something about this. As opposed to doing that, the opposite has basically occurred, where they don't even let you commit suicide. Now, again, I'm against committing suicide, but it's more about making a profit. Like, it's self-evident to say that it's more concerned about making a profit than workers' lives.
Right.
So, but I also have bought an iPhone. I still have one, and I still use their products. So, you know, as opposed to me saying, all right, guys, we got to make a revolution. We need to, protest at this factory. We need to stop buying their products. We need to, all switch to Samsung, which I don't know if that's much better, but we need to do something really drastic and radical about this. As opposed to doing that, I just use my iPhone. So when it comes to that debate of, I'm concerned with myself because I'm concerned with what I can change in the world versus, if versus the idea of, no, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing to address radical change, which has led to good things, such as the civil rights movement, where,
Right.
I remember we spoke about this last time. And one thing I learned in history class as of recently was the bus boycotts after Rosa Parks what did her sit-in protest, where she refused, civil disobedience would be a term for what she did. After she did that, many people decided to just drop using the buses altogether, in the area at all. And that
Mhm.
then tanked the profits of the bus companies, which then led to them making the change of, okay, you know what, we're going to remove the policy, and we're going to say that Black people can also go anywhere on the bus that they want, right?
Mhm.
So, those are examples of people that good things that have come from people that have basically said, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing. So at what point does it become evil to ignore an issue as a regular person?
Hmm. So it depends, because no one person can be conscious of every single evil thing in this world that needs to be changed all the time. Um, there are thousands upon thousands of things in this world that are evil, that need to be changed. And, a lot of them are the same thing, like sweatshops in China need to be changed, sweatshops in any other country need to be changed. But trying to change, they're all separate issues, even though they're the same issue. You can't think that changing sweatshops in China is going to change sweatshops in Vietnam, you know. Um, but I think it's only evil if you live your entire life unconcerned with any problem, any evil thing going on. If you aren't so keen on supporting the movement to end the use of sweatshops in China, that's fine. But if you're unconcerned with any movement at all, especially like in your own community, um, then there's a problem. I think at the very least, it's difficult to organize global efforts to stop things. Because, for example, if me and you started a movement to get Americans to stop buying Apple products, that would harm Apple's bottom line, and they would take a hit for it, you know. But that's not going to stop people everywhere else in the world from using Apple's products. So what is Apple going to do if all Americans stop buying Apple products? They're probably just going to focus their efforts on marketing to other places in the world, and the problem isn't going to get solved. Um, you might light a fire and convince everyone else in the world to do the same, but that's unlikely. It's noble to try, and I would say if anyone wants to try that they should. But big problems like that, and concerning yourself with big problems like that are out of reach, especially, um, I wouldn't call it evil, but you would be. Now, would you be an evil person for not doing anything? I don't know if evil is the right word, but I think that people should be at the very least concerned with what's going on in their own communities, you know. So if you're totally ignoring all the horrible things going on around you, then you are contributing to the problem by not contributing, to solving the problem. At the very least, and you don't have to be out there in the soup kitchens, volunteering. If you want to, that's great. But you should be voting. You should be doing something, to help the people around you, because it's I think I've always believed that the surest path towards like righting a lot of the wrongs in the world is for everyone to just consider the fact that we're all human. And even though we might respond in different ways to certain things and feel differently depending on culture or other factors in your environment, we all feel happiness, we all feel sadness, we all feel anger, we all feel the same things. And when horrible things are going on around you and people are suffering, think about yourself and how you would feel if that were you. You probably wouldn't like it very much. So, maybe you should help. Maybe helping someone in need is the best thing to do, because if you were in need, I guarantee you would want someone to help you too, you know. So it goes back to the old adage that you treat others how you want to be treated. And if you're ignoring people who are in need or issues that are going on, then you're not only doing a disservice to them, you're doing a disservice to yourself, because you're promoting that kind of behavior by inaction. And if you were in that situation, you wouldn't appreciate it if no one was helping you. So why aren't you helping anybody? Again, it's not to say that you should just devote your entire life to helping people. You can if you want to. People have done that, and it's great when people do. But that's not feasible for most people. At the very least, you should be involved. And that's something that I think has gone wrong in many ways with the world, is that we, in this country at least, we are much more concerned with ourselves than we are with others. And we don't promote community, I don't even know the word I want to use here, togetherness as much as we should.
Unity might be the word.
Yeah, maybe unity. Voting is seen as like something you have the right to do and something that you should do, but it's not as valued as I mean, you can look at the voting percentages for like local elections and stuff. Usually the turnout for like a local election is like 20% or something. I would argue that that number should be close to 100, you know? Why isn't everyone who lives somewhere like in your city, which affects you, you live in that city, not contributing to these kind of things? So in those ways you could say, yeah, these are things we aren't focusing so much on what matters, and that's wrong. And we should try and change the attitude towards that. You know, it's never going to happen where everyone is 100% involved in their community, especially when you're talking about scale. You know, I, I I can't imagine everyone in New York City, for example. What is New York's population? 13 million or something like that. It's got to be
Yeah,
big.
something pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, you're going to have a hard time getting 13 million people to all do one thing. You know, in smaller communities, it's a lot more feasible, but even in big places, you could break it down. You know, in New York, if you go by borough or neighborhood or district, congressional district, and trying to promote things like that. But I don't know. I've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but there are definitely ways that we could all be helping each other more, and it's not a bad thing to suggest that we should. And there are certain things that we need to promote or change. But at the same time, I wouldn't fault people individually for being or call them evil for the state that the world is and the way it's developed over time. Because the world that we live in, it's only become what it is after hundreds and thousands of years of things happening, you know? And you're not going to change those things overnight. So just doing whatever you can in small ways is best, talking about things, having conversations. But to call people evil for not concerning their lives with fixing everyone else's, I don't think that's right.
Well, I'm a very big proponent of the philosophy that whatever change you believe in starts with you.
Hmm.
So, if you think that there's something wrong in the world, okay, well, are you doing it? Do you contribute to that problem? If so, what are you doing about it? I think that's a fair way to look at things, because most people, when they look at change, they look at it from the perspective of this very big picture, when in reality, it does start with you. Because if everybody, so, here's an example. RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And this isn't to get political, but it's about the because I was asking, I spoke to a few people, just like in general, about like his run. And I'm a fan of a few things that he's promoting. I'm not gonna say I'm gonna vote for him, mainly because I can't, because I turn 18 in December, so I'm not gonna be able to vote this election. But
Sure.
what I was gonna say though was that with his candidacy, when I've asked people about him, they're like, "Oh, I love everything he says, but the problem is that he's not going to win." And I'm like, "Well, who told you that?" And they're like, "Well, he's just not." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And so my point is to them is like, "Well, you're not going to vote for somebody because you don't think he's going to win, which by proxy means that you're going to make him not win." It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That
Mm.
by you telling somebody, by having the idea that somebody's not going to win because they're unpopular, you have fulfilled that prophecy of making them unpopular or more unpopular by repeating it and then enacting on that action by just not voting for him, or if you believe that he's doing the right thing, right? Which,
Right.
to your point about enacting change, I think again it does start with you. So if you genuinely believe something is like, okay, like this is a good person, the problem is that if you're not going to vote for him because you don't think he's going to win, well, then he's not going to win, because everybody has that philosophy, you know. So it does start with you. If you
Yeah.
think that's what I think. And I think that if a lot of people took it upon themselves to do the right thing when they know that they should, I'm also a big proponent that that would help the world a lot. So it's like a known thing, for example, that um, like climate change activists are known to use private jets. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, or like I'm not gonna like name a list of people that have done it, but I think well, I'm gonna say like Taylor Swift. Like that's a major criticism that people have of her, is that she's a proponent against climate change, but then also she's using a private jet, which in total has used like something like thousands of cars worth of fuel. So, you know, if I was her and I promoted against climate change, would I do that? No. Do I know her situation? Also, no. So, but my point with change starting with you is that I think that if you look internally and you fix your problems and you look, okay, why do I do this? You typically get a lot further than if you try to rally a bunch of support towards something that you can't even get yourself to do, if that makes sense.
Sure. Oh yeah, if you are committed to some kind of movement and you aren't totally changing behaviors you had previously, that what you're fighting against, like you said, with the private jets and the climate change activists, then yeah, you're doing something wrong. It does start with you. People, if you want to make changes in the world, you need to change yourself. Um, no, I agree. At the same time, it's after you change yourself and you see, hey, this is what I think I'm doing wrong and I'm contributing to these things, and you want to start a movement, I think that's great. But again, I'm not going to fault everyone for not immediately running out the door and starting movements every day. Movements do need to happen, um, and big change. I don't want to. I know I said earlier, like, we could convince everyone to stop buying Apple products in America and try and change things that way. I don't want to say that you shouldn't try and do big things. Um, but at the same time, I wouldn't fault the average person for not dedicating their life to some cause, even if that's technically the morally correct thing to do in a perfect world is, when you see injustice, you go out and fight it however you can. But, it does start with you. If you want to make changes in the world, um, changing your behavior or your actions or what you do is a great way to start. Um, if you want to throw away your iPhone in protest and not buy Apple products or buy products from companies that are known to engage in evil practices, that's not a bad thing to do. Is it going to solve problems overnight? No, it's not. But if more people adopted that attitude, maybe a lot of things would get better.
Well, there's also in some cases the difference between what people believe idealistically and what again what people do. So I told this
Mhm.
story on my interview, which was like a month or two ago at this point. So, you know, it's going to be brand new to a lot of people, but when it comes out, it'll make more sense because I have more context there. But I had a very close friend, right? And good kid all around. I've had some of the best laughs with this kid I've ever had in my life, but he was a very big proponent of a lot of things that he did not practice. One of those things was that men should fight out all their problems, right? And to some extent, I will say that I agree that like certain problems, if you have a mutual agreement that you wanna solve it in a fist fight, go ahead. To some extent, you know, I think you have to be careful with it. But anyways, regardless of that, my point to him with him was that he was a very big proponent of this, like as big of a proponent as you could get, right?
Mhm.
And he's like, you know, um, and he would always tell me he's like um, about how he, I'm trying to like think of a way to say it without saying like too much, but like because he would always get into these talks about how men should fight, men should fight, men should fight. If somebody says something that disrespects you in any way, you should fight it out. Um, and that was a very big part of his philosophy for a little bit. And you know, there were two instances. Actually, I want to say this first. There was somebody that he knew that actually got into a fight over something silly, a fist fight, and I was like, and he told the kid, he's like, okay, you did a good thing by punching the kid in the face who disrespected you. Now, that's a whole nother subject, but he truly believed this in an idealistic sense. However, my friend when there were two instances, one of which where he was disrespected, and I saw it happen in front of me, and another where it was a story, where he told me that I'm trying to think of exactly what he said. So one instance was, a kid swung on him, and he responded by, just cursing him out, basically. So he didn't get into a fight, and the kid calmed down after he tried to swing on him, and he cursed him out. But I then, and then there was another instance where I saw him get disrespected by somebody, and he kind of like laughed it off. And I said to him in a very direct sense, like, after we got on a phone call one day and we kind of agreed that we needed some time apart, I said to him, like, well, one thing that, you're not doing, and that always kind of frustrated me, was that you are talking about this very idealistic sense of what a good man would be. A good man would fight the person who does this and that, but meanwhile, you're not embodying that. Like your actions aren't following your words. And he kind of he did agree with me, as I pointed out to him. But my example is that, he was such an extreme supporter of this idea that men should fight out the problems. And yet he was the furthest thing from that. And if somebody were to say something to him, he would just be like, oh, could you please leave me alone? Oh, could you do? And I'm like, but at the same time, you're the person who would tell me or tell somebody else who got into a fight, like, or say if somebody got into a fight, that's a good thing to do, so you can't. And then I point that out to him, and he's like, oh, that's true. I didn't even think about that. I think there was a few reasons why he did what he did, but to the point of helping, of believing what you say, and acting on it. I think that's also important. It's like you have to know what you actually believe and what you're actually willing to do.
Yeah. Practice what you preach. That's an old saying. And yeah, I mean, if you believe in something and you're saying things need to change and you're not making those changes yourself, or in your friend's case, that's not exactly a change, but if you believe in a practice like that, and when it comes time for that to be put to the test and you don't do it, then I mean, you're in the wrong. That's not a right thing to do, not at all. And you could say that for any position. If you, for example, I often talk about empathy in videos, and I talk about how we would all be better off if we treated each other how we want to be treated. Which seems like such a simple concept that we've all heard since, we were young, but it's something that I feel like people need to be reminded of all the time. And then it turns out that in real life, I'm this horrible asshole who screams at people on the street, and whenever somebody looks at me funny, I punch them in the face. Well, then who the hell am I? That's not right. So yeah, it's definitely not a good thing to say you're for something, and then when it comes time for that to be tested, turns out you're not.
Right. Yeah. And in the case of my friend, I think he was a good kid. 100%. We don't talk as much anymore. We ended off on good terms. It was other things, but when I pointed that out to him, it's just like, because one thing I noticed with him is that he would always go from one philosophy to the next, and it would be like as extreme as you could imagine, and as quick of amount of time as you could imagine. And I mean, it's into the point where it would be like men should fight out all their problems. If somebody disrespects you, you should fight it out all the time. Which, as I pointed out, I don't think he truly believed that, considering that when it was put to the test, he was just kind of like, he just got upset or was extremely passive. It was like, oh, could you please leave me alone? Could you please not do this? Or, there'll be other times where, some kid would, say something, and then his brother would tell him, he's like, you should have punched him in the face for that. And then he would tell me, he's like, yeah, and I agree with that. But then I would see him talking to that kid perfectly fine the next day. And I'm like, well, how are you going to say that, you should have punched somebody in the face because what they did was wrong, and I do agree that what the other kid did was wrong. But I'm like, how are you going to both agree that, with this and this? And his response was like, okay, well, you should be, like and then my point with the philosophy thing, though, of like one extreme to the next, was like the next day he would be like, oh, well, God, says to forgive, or something like that. It's as quick of like an extreme as you could imagine. And so
Mhm.
when I pointed this out to him, he's like, "Oh, it's because I'm always thinking." Is that entirely true? I don't know, but I just it was always something that bothered me because I always like
Sure.
to believe, yeah.
Yeah. So you did the best thing that you can do in those situations, which is you called him out on it. Said, "Hey, this isn't. You said this, but you're saying this." Now, did he change overnight? It sounds like he did come to a realization in one of your conversations, like, "Oh, you're right. I did say that, and I'm wrong." But sometimes people
Well,
are going to fight you, and they're going to say, "Oh, whatever," make some excuse, right? But calling someone out, even if it doesn't fix things in the moment, you are going to make them think, you know. Um, they might go home later that day once they've cooled down and think about everything that happened. You're like, maybe George is right. Maybe I am being dishonest with myself and what I'm saying here. And and because there's a bunch of ways that you can respond to that situation, right? You could have said, "Oh, what about fighting? I thought you said to fight everybody. What are you, a coward? You're not going to do it yourself?" And then you're just antagonizing him, and you're not really fixing anything, but just saying, "Hey, didn't you say that you're supposed to like fight? Why aren't you doing it?" "Oh, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't say things like that if you're not going to do it." There's no reason to. I don't think there's any reason to approach those kind of situations in any other way than just calling someone out. You know, Especially if it's in front of other people, because that'll even amplify the thoughts they might have later on. Like, oh, I got called out in front of all these people. That maybe I should rethink some of my positions here. But another thing to consider, though, is not to devalue anything, but you guys are young still, too, and people are. I remember I was figuring all kinds of things out back then. So someone jumping from position to position when they're younger, especially, isn't something that I would necessarily like write them off for. Just say, "Oh, he's just an indecisive person, and he can't be trusted." I would attribute that more to youth in this scenario. Now, if someone's like 40 and this is happening, they've had some time to develop a worldview and life experience and being wishy-washy on stuff and not sticking to your guns, then definitely. But I think he's probably just figuring things out, and once he has a little more experience in the world, he might drop that men should fight everything out philosophy, because I'll tell you right now that that's not that's not a good solution to your problems. That's for sure. That's when you're a
right.
teenager, though. I used to fight people all the time when I was in high school. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I've even mentioned I'm not against it. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not gonna sit here and be like, no, nobody should ever fight anything out physically. Like, no, if that's how you decide to, with that other person, you know, or this is how we're gonna solve this problem and fix our frustration, fine. Then go ahead. I don't have a problem with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But do I think you should do it safely? Yeah. I think that too. But I also think that with his philosophy of every single thing should be fought out, in the slightest disrespect, you know, that's where I disagree with him. And it's just the fact that it was the fact that he was so extreme, and yet, and he would even promote it and advise people to do it. And he was like happy when people did it, but then he himself wouldn't do it. And so that was problematic to me. So,
Mhm.
one thing I actually do want to say now, switching away from real world scenarios.
Okay.
So there was a question I had there was the last question of the last interview we did, which was the last question I asked you was, what is I believe it was what is the most morally good action that you've seen a truly evil villain do, or evil character do, and for what reason was it done? Now, you said you would comment it on that video, and you didn't,
Oh,
and it's okay,
oh,
but
I'm sorry.
it's all right, all good.
Um, You know what? Here, let me do this real quick. Let me look through all my videos and refresh my memory and see if I can answer that question for you. So, you want to know what? Say your question one more time.
What is the most morally good thing that you think an evil character has done, and for what reason was it done?
Let's see. Let's see here. Mhm. 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 What a hard question. I'm trying. So first of
Do
all,
you
I'm
want to
gonna.
comment it on the new video?
No, I'll probably forget again. Don't. I'm sorry, but I do tend to forget things like that. No, the problem I'm thinking right now is, you know, first of all, I typically like when I'm on to the next villain, I forget a lot of things. And two, um, it's really hard, especially if you want me to find like a really evil character to say something that good that they've done. Because if we're talking like pure evil, like Palpatine, for example, there isn't anything, you know. If I go further down the ladder, um, I mean, so what they've actually done or what they tried to do? You want what they've actually done?
Well, first give me what they've actually done, then what they've tried.
Okay. Because if we're tried to do, I mean, the answer would probably be like Thanos, right? Because he tried to make the universe a better place in a really horrific way. Um, Another example in that same vein would be someone like Richmond Valentine from Kingsman Secret Service or Ozymandias from Watchmen. But what is something good? Uh, Travis Bickle was trying his best to save that girl, if I remember correctly, in Taxi Driver. Um, went about it in a pretty bad way, though. Ah, yeah, I don't know. It's so hard with villains, especially because they hardly ever do anything good, and if they do anything good, they do it in a bad way, you know. Um, I don't know. I don't know. If I put a lot of thought into it, because sometimes I'll have lay in bed at night and think things through. Maybe I'll think about it and I will comment. I'll say maybe maybe I'll make the comment. It's a hard question though.
Yeah.
It's a good question, but it's a hard one.
All right, I'll give you some time to think on it. I was actually going to ask a follow up to that, and I was probably going to ask you this earlier, but it was about vigilantism. So, vigilantism is a bit of a difficult subject
Mhm.
because you can argue that the core of vigilantism, let's just say a character like Batman, his whole goal is to punish bad people,
Mhm.
right? And to, if you like listen to certain speeches that Batman has given, like in or monologues, I should say, not speeches, but monologues that he's given, it's always along the lines of the power of fear and the power that using the bat suit and the fear that it instills in criminals and that it puts into their hearts, and then it prevents them from committing crimes.
Mhm.
And the fact that he's beating these people up, and sometimes in very horrific ways. He never kills anybody. That's the key of Batman, that he never kills anybody. But
Right.
if I think Game Theory made a video about it. Not Matt Pat, but like one of his co-hosts or whatever. They made a video about it where it was the injuries that Batman would be realistically causing. That's like where if like he ties people up in one of the Arkham games and he causes like that would likely cause like broken ankles, and like you can see these people's bones being
Mhm.
broken and these people being traumatically injured by Batman,
Mhm.
but like in the most horrendous ways, like broken ribs, whatever.
Mhm.
And they're usually just the henchmen of a guy. They're not even like the actual person themselves. And so my point with the question of vigilantism is how do you tackle a subject like that when it could be argued that they're doing a net positive, just in a very, very brutal or possibly evil way?
So I was actually for a while now. I think I said it in when I made a video about the latest Batman movie. But I actually have wanted to make a video about vigilantism and just talk about like the moral implications of it. And if I did eventually make that video, Batman would be pretty central to it because Batman, in many ways, is the perfect vigilante. Like, even despite the fact that he hurts people, um, it's typically he tries his best not to, and he only hurts them if he absolutely has to in the moment. And then when he doesn't, so I'm going to correct you a little bit here. Batman doesn't hunt bad people to punish them. He does not to punish them personally. Batman hunts down criminals and then he takes them to the police. And that's what makes that Batman the perfect vigilante because he's acting as like an extension of law enforcement. He's not out there just pummeling supervillains and criminals and then leaving them in the dirt to think about what they've done. He's trying to help the police apprehend them, and then he takes them to them. So, and that's there is a lawfully sanctioned profession that deals in vigilantism, and that's bounty hunters. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was big on TV back in the day, but Dog the Bounty Hunter. That was a big show here. And what did Dog do? He had a license to pursue people that had warrants and stuff, and then he could arrest them and take them to the police. And people probably got hurt in altercations involving Dog the Bounty Hunter. But again, he wasn't specifically trying to hurt them. He was trying to take them to the police. Now, bounty hunting like that and that type of vigilantism, I think that's fine, especially when you're talking about trained professionals, because typically bounty hunters, they might be former law enforcement, former military or something. They have had training, so they know how to do these things. Vigilantism on a civilian level is bad, though. I think that's a bad thing. Because people without training out there trying to wrangle other people and take them to the police or punish them because they think they need to get punished, that's probably only going to cause more harm than it is good. Someone who has little training with a gun going out and trying to shoot bad guys, well, they might accidentally shoot a bystander. There's so many things that could happen with untrained people engaging in like fighting crime like that. So vigilantism, it can be a good thing if it's done in the right way, and that typically involves training, but for untrained people to engage in it, I think that's a very, very bad thing and a very slippery slope, because you're not even just hurting other people, you probably hurt yourself in the process. How many people are actually trained to fight criminals, who will probably cut your throat, or something. You never know. Not probably. You never know what someone's going to do. So yeah, there's a lot of nuances to vigilantism. But yeah, not wholly evil, not wholly good. It just can be harmful depending on who's doing it. And I wouldn't condone it for the average person to engage in, that's for sure.
Well, I will say that Batman is an interesting figure overall. And I'm not talking about just the Arkham games. I'm talking about like in general. He's always been one of my personal favorite superheroes, but with him, that's probably really basic of a pick, but I like him for the fact that, he's for the same reason a lot of people do, which is that he's a human in a world of superhumans, and he oftentimes beats them and, at their own game, which I think is cool. And, he's one of the originals. So, but regardless, with Batman as a character, and what I find to be problematic about him is that what is known about him is that he's known to take everything into his own hands and not trust anybody. And it's to a point where one thing he's known to do is make contingency plans for his own friends, right?
Mhm.
So that includes Superman. So like he has, there's been multiple instances where those contingency plans were found and then altered, and then like villains would try to kill these people, like members of the Justice League, and then the Justice League would find out like, okay, where these plans come from. They find Batman, you know, not gave it to them, but they found it through Batman's computer or whatever, and then everybody in the Justice League was like, "What the hell are you doing, trying to figure out these ways to kill us?" And Batman's like, "Well, you all are superhuman, so if you were to ever go rogue, I might as well figure out a plan." And obviously they're disturbed by that because they're like, okay, so he has plans to neutralize us, not necessarily kill, but to neutralize us if we ever became a threat to mankind.
Mhm.
And Batman kind of doesn't have any problem with that, which and he doesn't have, another thing is also, he doesn't have problems with taking children into his workforce,
Mhm.
like
Like
so.
Robin, yeah.
Yeah, Robin. So like that's, Robin is like 13. He's younger than me, right?
Mhm.
And he's like 12. So he's like this little kid basically being trained to fight not just criminals, not just like,
Mhm.
bad people. Because imagine like just a 12-year-old kid fighting a grown man as it is, but like individuals that are armed, individuals that have, many weapons at their disposal,
Mhm.
individuals that are superhuman in some cases. So Batman's argument would be, well, that's better than them just being orphans. But is
Mhm.
that, so is Batman evil in the traditional sense, or is he just delusional?
Um, yeah, so what I said about Batman being like the perfect vigilante is like Batman as a concept is the perfect vigilante, you know. Depending on the story that you're reading, because there's so many Batman stories and the, different canons and all that stuff. There's plenty of things wrong with what Batman does and morally questionable. Um, so I wouldn't call Batman evil, delusional, maybe. He's misguided in certain ways, I guess you could say. He's trying to do the right thing the best that he can, even though in many ways he probably shouldn't. Um, I don't know. It's a complicated subject as far as Batman is concerned because you're right. Taking Robin for example, um, and training him to fight criminals and exposing him to danger, um, might not be the best thing. But in most cases, at least as far as I know, the one thing you can give Batman credit for as far as Robin goes is I don't think Batman has ever forced someone to be Robin. You know what I mean? I don't think he's ever, like he never finds a boy as a baby and decides that, he's going to train him to fight crime and that's going to be his life. He's decided, it's typically someone who's like, they know who Batman is. They've come under Batman's care and they want to be a part of Batman's crew. And so, and the most of the time he's reluctant to do it, but he agrees to train them. So you can give Batman credit for that. It's not like he has this policy of picking up random orphan kids and forcing them to be Robin. It's typically Robin's like, I want to be Robin. And Batman's like, I don't really want you to be Robin. And it's like, no, I really want to be Robin. And Batman's like, fine, I'll let you be Robin. So I don't know. Batman's a fun and difficult subject to talk about. There's so much nuance to his character, and I've always liked him too. So I don't really like superhero stuff in general. Like I always say, the Green Lantern's my favorite superhero, but I don't even. The only thing I ever watched was the whole Justice League cartoon when I was a kid. I love Batman movies because you're right. He's just a guy, and Batman stories, it's not really a superhero story. It's a crime fighting story where everybody's dressing up, you know? Batman is pretty much a glorified police detective in a costume, and he's fighting glorified criminals in costumes. So, yeah, Batman's cool. I've always enjoyed delving into Batman stuff.
Yeah. Well, with Batman too, I mean, you can put him in so many different scenarios and he fits very well as well. So like
Mhm.
you could have him fighting like a superpowered being, but the
Mhm.
guy is not so powerful that it's like it's completely out of your imagination.
Mhm.
So like with a guy like Superman, for example, why does okay, I'm gonna say this. Everybody hates Superman in the sense of they don't view him as a particularly interesting character in the
Mhm.
sense of, I hate maybe is too strong of a word. I don't like Superman as a concept or not as a concept, sorry, the way he's written, because Superman is written in the sense of, a god, basically, an alien
Mhm.
with god powers that has come down to Earth, that
Mhm.
has all these abilities and has to be nerfed for every single fight.
Mhm.
And, he's either so unbelievably powerful that he can rip dimensions apart, or
Mhm.
they nerf him to such a degree where he's like having to punch a mountain apart. And he's like struggling to do that. And, so that's part of it, is that he's so above a normal human that it's impossible to relate to him.
Mhm.
And I and again, I don't like the way that he's written in the sense of they just portray him as this perfectly good person with nothing wrong with him, and he's always willing to do the right thing. And I
Mhm.
think that could be good. I think like All Star Superman's a good way of writing that,
Mhm.
where it's like a more human portrayal of Superman. But the way that he's written is unfortunately kind of just this idiot who, just is really good, and he, has godlike powers, and he can basically be anyone anytime he wants if the writers will it,
Mhm.
which I don't like. Batman, on the other hand, it's, a guy versus a guy for the most
Mhm.
part, or it's a guy versus Clayface, who's like, you know, maybe building level, but he's not so absurdly powerful that he's like, it's unrelative to like anything you could imagine. And when you're
Mhm.
playing the games, he's, I like the Arkham games. But I was also going to say that I remember during our last podcast, I had mentioned Reverse Flash as a
Yeah, I remember
character.
you talking about him. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you at all look into him? Because I
I,
feel like he'd be a
yeah.
really good video. No, he'd
Yeah.
be a great video. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of. I don't know if I've seen a lot of suggestions for him, but I've seen a few. Um, and if that meme's any indication, he seems pretty cool. So, um, but yeah, Superman is interesting because him and I don't know how much longer Batman came out after Superman, but Superman is like a victim of a simpler time because I don't think comic book writers back in the day ever expected them to enter into the realm of like seriousness or I guess seriousness is the best way to say it because what was Superman originally? He was the good guy who was always fighting the bad guy, and that was each comic. Here's Superman, here's the situation, here he goes. And comics were for a long time considered, you know, I don't know if I would say dumb, but just not as like intellectually stimulating as other types of media because that's what it boiled down to. Big, huge, good guy punching the bad guys. And for that time period, that was great, but that does tend to be very black and white. And unfortunately, with a character like Superman, it's hard to, like you said, give him any nuance because he is so overpowered. And in those fun little, crime fighting comics where it's just the hero against the bad guy, it's a real feel good story and there's not much else to think about it. That's fine. But once you start trying to make it into something more complicated, it's like, oh, uh, how do we do this now? How do we make this guy who can't, die to anything face any kind of challenge? So yeah.
Well, that's why kryptonite was invented. Most people don't know that, but that's why it was invented, literally just to make the story more interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think that speaks a lot to how he was written. And that's a good way of putting it, that he was a victim of a simpler time. Because I mean, yeah, I mean, you worded it well. First of all, so with Superman though, there are ways to write him.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's hard. I think it's just a little bit more. It's a little bit more steps you have to take,
Yeah.
because with Batman, it's pretty easy to write him. I mean, he's a human, so like he can die. So what's his struggle? Okay, well, he's not immune to
Mhm.
bullets, for example, so he has to avoid bullets.
Right.
If he gets shot, like I think what's I don't know what the guy's name is, but he made this series called How to Kill. Now it's like How to Unalive Superheroes, but it was like How to Kill Batman, and he's like I could end the video in 1 minute by just saying Two Face could hire a sniper and just kill Batman, and that's the end of the story because Batman's a normal guy.
Mhm.
Like it's kind of funny when
Right.
you're dealing with all these superheroes that can
Mhm.
erase people from time and do all these crazy things. Batman's just a guy who can die by guns,
Right.
or get stabbed. I think there was a story where it was a cartoon where Batman the animated series, I think it was, where
Mhm.
uh I think one of the Joker's hitmen kills Batman, and he's like, "Wait, there's no way I actually did it." And then the Joker is like, "Why would you do that? Now you basically ruined my entire purpose in life."
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen a clip of that. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So with Batman, it's like you can write him as just a person, and you can give him
Mhm.
any struggle that a normal person has. You can make it literally like there's stories where Batman is just too stressed to be Batman, and he talks about how weary his like. There's a clip like he's like, "Oh, I feel like every day I'm fighting this battle and nothing ever changes." Like, and that's like a
Mhm.
normal human feeling that like his efforts are kind of fruitless because every day he's just waking up, staying up all night, and then fighting crime, and then nothing changes, and then he has to beat up the
Yeah.
same people over and over again, and then throw the same people in Arkham Asylum, and then these people don't get the death penalty, or they don't get the help they need, or they just manipulate the cops out of getting out of jail, or they pay
Mhm.
somebody off. So there's like it's such a pointless thing for him when he doesn't. It's not like the Punisher, where the Punisher just kills everybody, which
Right.
is I think also why he's kind of a poorly written character, because it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, you get a guy who just kills everybody. Okay, well, now
Right.
what? Now there's no
Mhm.
like. So that's part. I also don't. I like the Punisher. I don't like the way he's written either. And to your point about Green Lantern, he's your favorite hero. I love Green Lantern. I think
Mhm.
he's a very underrated character. But I talked to my cousin with this, where I'm like, why is it that Green Lantern, every story he's in, he has a ring that is fueled off of imagination, and he can literally use any weapon he wants, and yet he seems to get destroyed in every fight. And he said to me, he's like, well, because Green Lantern's powers are written in such a way that it's really to display somebody else's power. So
Mhm.
it's like,
Mhm.
which is also unfortunate because I feel like you could write so many good things about Green Lantern or
Sure.
using Green Lantern, you know. And with Superman, when it's a really well written story of Superman, it's it's when they take it from the perspective that from the beliefs that he was raised from, like helping people in need, and like that he's a human internally, but his DNA is not like he basically has powers of God, but he was raised as a human.
Mhm.
Um, so like the boy from Swellview, not Swellview, is Swellview some Henry Danger. What's the place that he was born in?
Superman?
Yeah,
You saying is it? It's not Smallville, is it?
I think it is Smallville. I feel like it is, but
That might be. Because I know Superman is in Smallville. See, I don't know that much about superhero stuff. So here I'm looking at it for you. What town was Superman born in, or what town did he land in? Is a better thing. I guess it's
yeah,
Metropolis. Maybe in some stories it's probably small. Small. Oh, here. His ship landed in the American countryside near the fictional town of Smallville, Kansas. That's what it
okay.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so when it's the boy from, I said Swellview, that's from Henry Danger. That's
Mm,
a completely different show.
that's all right.
But Smallville, the boy from Smallville, and he's raised with the beliefs of like two farmers, and
Mm,
helping other people and compassion, and to be what it means to be human as a god, basically, which I
right.
think is a very good perspective when he's not
Mm,
destroying everybody, and he has all these powers and they have to nerf him in his writing, because then it makes a boring
right.
character, and I feel like he has
Mm,
all this potential for all these great stories and people don't seem to use it.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because that applies to literally everyone, in all who you are and who you become, no matter what you actually are, because Superman is a Kryptonian with godlike powers. but he was raised by two farmers in Kansas, so he has the values of two farmers in Kansas. Now, if Superman with Kryptonian powers, godlike powers, was raised, I mean, there's that I haven't seen it. I've seen clips of it, but I don't know what it's called, Red Superman or something, where Superman actually lands in the USSR. Superman becomes a whole different person. And it's not because of who Superman is, it's because of what he was raised to be. And who you are genetically or mentally doesn't necessarily define who you are, but it's what you're raised around, that makes you into who you are. So it's yeah, there's a lot to go off of on that. That's something that um the writers of Superman could expand on, I'm sure, and make his story a little more interesting. Yeah.
Are you familiar? This is somewhat related, but are you familiar with the SCP Foundation at all?
I have heard of it and I've seen some stuff on it and I've seen people like ask me to do videos on it. But no, I don't know too much about it. I know it's like some community thing where people contribute and it's like this secret government organization or something like that.
Well, kind of. It's I'm gonna like explain it really shortly because it's like
Oh, I know it's
it
complicated as hell.
it's just so complicated and like there's so many
Mhm.
theories you go off. But the very basic explanation is that it's one of the biggest collaborative writing projects in the world, and it's
Mhm.
the idea that you're close with a government organization. It's a secret organization. It's not necessarily a government. It's not
Mhm.
it's not controlled. It's independent of any government. So it's independent
Okay.
of any government, and its whole point is to secure, contain, and protect and research the anomalies of the world.
Mm.
And
So
part of
like
that
Men
is
in
to
Black.
what
So kind of like Men in Black.
kind of, but like to a whole nother degree. And it's
Mm.
to your point about being complicated as hell. It
Mhm.
is. It 100% is because there's so many different writers, and it's it pushes the limits of human imagination in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
I like it, but I also hate it because the like I'm on and off with like being interested in it because the whole point is these people make these fake anomalies. That's like a very big part of it. It's like, and therefore they can make this lore, and they can make like one anomaly related to another, and then through that they can make like these stories, which is
Mhm.
interesting. But then like when you get 8 or 9 thousand people involved in that, then it gets very, very complicated.
Yeah, I imagine. I imagine.
What have you seen about it though?
Not, I couldn't say, not much, honestly. I just know that it's a collaboration thing, and that's pretty much the gist. Is it's some kind of secret organization dealing with monsters and stuff like that. But no,
Yeah.
I don't know too much about it.
Okay, that's fair. So moving on, I was gonna say that I also saw a clip recently, and it reminded me of a character that I've seen, and I feel like you would have made a video on this guy, but you didn't. Dio Brando,
He's coming out next week.
he is.
Yeah.
You've been doing. Go on, go
He,
on with what you're saying.
he was the patron pick for this month. So next week there will be a video on Dio out.
Okay,
And
because
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no. So I was gonna say the reason I'm bringing it up was because there was a clip about uh it was like, do you know the YouTuber Tyler Oliveira?
I've heard the name. I haven't seen any
Yeah,
of his stuff though.
he does investigative journalism. He made a video with this one lawyer who like frees really, really terrible people from prison, like
Okay.
rapists and sex offenders. And he's like, and somebody commented, they're like, this guy's most frequent clients are Judge Holden, Griffith, and Dio Brando. But I'm familiar with Judge Holden, and all the things that he's done. Griffith, both of them are like rapists, pedophiles, and all these other things. And but I looked up Dio, and I'm like, what has Dio exactly done? Because I've watched a bit of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and what did Dio do that's like putting him on that level?
So funnily enough, I actually am finishing up another patron pick right now. Um, from last month, which I didn't have the time to do, which is the governor from The Walking Dead. So I haven't actually started it yet. I'm gonna start tomorrow on JoJo. So I am as much in the dark as you are on JoJo right now. I don't know what he's done, but I know that for some reason he's really evil. And I think because I tried to watch JoJo back in the day, and I think I watched like 10 episodes. And from what I remember, it seems like Dio is just an evil bastard. Like he kills people because he wants to. He wants a lot of power. He's trying to get the power of the stands or something like that. And I think it just I like I said, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't want to make any concrete judgments on his character. But from what I've seen, knowing little about it, it seems like Dio is pretty much a classic evil, wherein he wants it all, and he's gonna take it all no matter what he's got to do to get it. You know? Yeah.
So now a follow-up question to that. Judge Holden. I am unfamiliar with his entire story
Mhm.
because I haven't read Blood Meridian, but I looked him up, and from the way I understand it is that he is kind of like an open to interpretation type of character in the
Oh
sense
yeah.
of like what he represents, because what he does is like is the definition of evil. It's like, he rapes, molests kids, he
Mhm.
like luring them in with candy, as I've because I searched up his name. I'm like, what has this guy done that's so evil? And then I looked it up, and it's like, okay, he bought two puppies just to drown them, and like all these other things. But what is his deal? Like, what's your interpretation of him as a character?
So my interpretation, um, and it's one that I've gotten some pushback for, but also support for, because again, like you said, unfortunately, and unless he's written something that someone in his family will unearth later on or something, Cormac McCarthy never said what the judge is, before he died. So his character is heavily up to interpretation. And my interpretation is that he is supposed to be the devil. And he is accompanying these men on their journey through would you call it the West? Because I think it happens in Texas, but it
Yeah.
has that like Wild West feel to it. So he's accompanying them on their journey, and he's just like promoting all these evil things that they do, and then doing evil things himself. And it seems, from what I was reading in the story, it seems to me like he's supposed to represent the devil. Um, a lot of people say he's supposed to be like a Gnostic demon, which is a whole nother thing to explore. But I thought, yeah, he's supposed to be the devil. Is what I think his deal is.
Well, I think what's interesting about him is that he's depicted as inhuman as he can be, but in a way that he's still technically a person. Like, he's
Right.
still a real guy that could exist. I think he suffers from an extreme form of alopecia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's got no hair. He's completely hairless, and
Yeah.
yeah, he's like human adjacent is how I would say it, because he's like incredibly strong, and as far as I don't think he needs to eat or sleep in the story. So there's definitely something inhuman about him. But he is, yes, his physical characteristics aren't necessarily possible, but who he is as a person is definitely possible. You know.
With with him, I the major interpretation again is that he is a mouthpiece almost for the insatiable desire for human war and violence.
Mhm.
Um, which I understand, I definitely, but I think that violence is like not a good way to put it, because it goes beyond violence, because it goes into, like, again, molesting children, for example. That's not really necessarily a violent act. I mean, that's very terrible, but it's not violent necessarily. So with that, I think to your point about it being the devil, I think his nickname is the devil in the book. I think that's one of his nicknames, if am I not
It might
mistaken.
have been. It might have been. Yeah, it just seems like in general he's promoting negative human behavior, which is something that you would expect the devil to do. You know.
Well,
Um,
he also plays a fiddle. He also is very good at the violin.
yeah. No, that's one of the things that I use to to support my argument was the fact that he's heavily associated with the fiddle, and the devil has also traditionally been heavily associated with the fiddle. So there's a lot of clues I saw in the book that point to him being the devil, but again, other people have interpreted his character in different ways. It's just what I saw. I was like, oh, this guy seems there's a lot of devil stuff in here, looking pretty devil-like to me. And there's actually a guy in the Discord server. His name's the Raccoon Gunslinger, and he's a big fan of Cormac McCarthy and read the book many times. And I had him read the script before I made the video because I do that sometimes with people in the Discord who talk to me a lot about certain characters because I want to make sure that I'm not way off base, especially on complicated stuff. So I had him read it, and he was like, I thought exactly the same thing, and I was like, well, if a fan thinks it's right, then I'm gonna go with it. And yeah.
Well, now this is a complete move away, but also not entirely, because you actually gave me a good transition for this. So about being completely off base. So I looked at, I think your most popular clip from from your episode on Julian Dory, when Julian was making clips, was about the mafia. So I don't know if you've seen the clip. I liked it. I liked the clip. But I looked at the comments, and people, I think this has more to do with how the video was edited than you, but people were criticizing you. And they were saying, like, I can't believe that this guy would say that the mafia were good people. Like, let me just read like one comment exactly. They were noble, good people. What?
Did I say they were good people? I don't remember saying that.
Well, I mean, he like, I'm trying to like find so I'm just gonna like skim through it, because your point was that basically they don't kill innocent people, right? And then some of the comments were along the lines of like, I love when people talk about that stuff like it's all sunshine and rainbows, like who's never been around it. And I'm like, okay, well, like clearly this person, I don't know. I feel like everybody in the comment section was too quick to judge, but I'm just curious on like your thoughts, because I think people were saying like, but the mafia made people pay tribute, for example. So it's like they did arm civilians, or like, the fact that they destroy neighborhoods, and the fact that they've done all these terrible things to normal civilians, and yet, just because they don't kill civilians, that's a good thing, or there's a code of honor.
So I don't remember what I said, but I mean, I don't think the people in the mafia are good or noble at all. And I was probably, if I had to guess, I'm guessing all I commented on was the fact that the mafia had a policy of not killing innocent people who weren't involved. They would kill someone who owed them debts, but that was considered fair game. They were no longer innocent. They were indebted to them, and they knew the rules of the game, and so they would kill people like that. And I mean, that's true that they don't kill innocent people, but I would never say that they've never had an effect on innocent people, because that's not true. Like you said, yeah, they shut down shop owners to pay them protection money. They've innocent people are affect, even if they don't kill innocent people, right? Whoever's involved in the mafia, let's say I signed up for the mafia and then I die because in a mob war. Now, I was involved in the mob, and for that war, that was fair game. You know what I mean? I was no longer innocent. I was involved. So you can't. There's a difference between killing an innocent and someone in the game, but at the same time, even though the act of murdering another a mob member murdering another mob member is like, okay, they knew what they were signing up for, right? How can you fault them because they knew that? At the same time, you're taking away someone's son, husband, best friend, brother, whatever you have it, So the death of a mob member has an effect on their family, Yeah, I'm sorry that people got that impression, but I would never say that the mob is good. In fact, I think the mob is horrible and it shouldn't exist. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely,
well, no,
definitely.
yeah, I think it was more. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I think it was more to do with the way that the video was edited, because it was just like a
Mhm.
very short clip of you saying like, "Well, they didn't kill innocent people," or like they tried not to, and then people in the comments were like, "How could he say that? Like, they did these terrible things to innocent people," and it's like, and I was reading that, I'm like, okay, I don't think that's what he meant. I think that because I didn't get to watch the full episode, I watched like 30 minutes of it, and I liked it.
Mhm.
And I would recommend people go watch it, but no, I think that it was just like not badly edited, but it was edited in like the sense of like it was too short to like get a full
Mhm.
concept, which is something that I've noticed people are very quick to do with like not just his videos, but in general with clips, where it's
Yeah.
like, so it don't take it. It's not like a personal thing. It's like, okay, people see
Oh.
this one guy saying, okay, they didn't kill innocent people. Let me go
Mhm.
comment and state my opinion about how he's wrong.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it is what it is. But yeah, I think that's a good place. Actually, let me ask one question.
Okay.
Two questions actually. So, do you have any advice to young people?
Any advice to young people? Whoa. um, so I I give this advice to everyone, I guess, but I think it's probably especially important to young people for young people because young people are much more susceptible to being groomed into any kind of, negative ideology or anything like that. Everyone's young and susceptible and ignorant. And so when someone approaches you with something that sounds really smart, even if it isn't, you know, young people are more susceptible to falling for things like that than anything. And I, for any young person, I would say don't put your eggs in one basket as far as beliefs go. If you were raised a certain way, it's fine to stick up for what you were raised in and what you believe in and what your parents taught you. But at the same time, I encourage everybody to um, do their own research and try to formulate their own opinions about the world and about things that are going on around you. And that doesn't include like just what you believe in, but what other people are saying too. To not just take everything at face value, to really look at what people are saying to you and what they're trying to get you to believe or to sign up for. But more than that, I would say that it sounds like something that your teachers told you when you were younger, so you would get along with people and not be a bully, for example. Like I said earlier, since we were very young, and I'm pretty sure they still did this for your generation, but treat others how you want to be treated was a central thing that all of us learned in elementary school. So when you are faced with someone that you disagree with, right? Or even someone you might think is evil, for example, consider the fact that most people are not diabolical, world ending creatures who are trying to destroy the very fabric of everything that you hold dear. They are just people with different views from you that, depending on the view, could be very harmful and should be, eliminated. But responding to them with hatred and vilifying them, it might be necessary at a certain point, but more often than not, talking to someone is the best way to find out why they believe what they believe and why they might be opposed to you or why they might be opposed to other or why they might be hateful. And when you talk to someone and learn more about them, then you can talk back and try and steer them away from things that might be harmful. And a good example. Now, I don't know anything about the man beyond what he's done in this regard, but have you ever heard of Daryl Davis?
Yes, yes, he's the man that hugs, not hugs, but he befriends Nazis or white supremacist KKK members.
Yeah. So what Daryl Davis's philosophy is he goes to clan members and he talks to them and he asks them why they believe what they believe and what they believe. And when he talks to them, he offers them counter arguments, and not even arguments. He just talks to them. He says, well, you believe this. Well, how about this? Have you ever considered this? Have you ever looked at it this way? And he has gotten something like over 20 clan members to
I think
renounce.
200. It's like
Oh,
hundreds.
yeah, it's hundreds. You see, I don't even know the number, but it's like hundreds of clan members to renounce their racist ways and change their lives, you know? And he did that by talking to them. Now imagine if everybody did that, you know? Imagine if everybody talked to each other rather than just trying to say that they're evil or need to just go away. You know, the thing about people who have been taken in by evil mindsets is that they shouldn't be seen as the enemy. They should be seen as your brothers and sisters who have lost their way. And as long as they haven't done anything extremely horrific that warrants, you know, jail time or what have you, it should be your your main concern should be trying to bring them back, not push them away, you know. Um, so that's one way that you should think of others, you know. Um, try to identify with people and understand why they think what they think and why they do what they do rather than just outright discounting them. And also, when you're dealing with anyone at all, you should treat them as if they were yourself. You know, how would I feel in this situation if I were on the other end of this stick? If you're yelling at someone, would you appreciate it if they yelled at you? You know, would you appreciate anything negative that happens to you that you do to someone else? And that's really hard to do. I'm going to say that right now. It's not easy to always be conscious of your actions and the effect they have on others. But if you can try and keep in mind that other people want to be treated just as well as you want to be treated, that will help you a lot and go a long way in improving your relations with people, improving your relations with the world, and making a bit better impact on the world. So I guess that's what I'd have to say to young people. That's what I got for you.
What's the and this is the last question. Then I'm gonna end the recording. We'll talk like for a minute or two after the show. But I was gonna say that what's the most important thing that you've learned either in your, I guess you could say in your lifetime, or you know, more specifically from doing the channel, from you know, doing it, from everything, from you know, just from everything that you've gathered. Like, what's the most important thing that you've learned?
Um, kind of ties back into what I was just saying, but I mean, I always kind of knew it um, before I started the channel, but it's really emphasized for me that evil, you know, is very much not black and white. And that is really the reason that my channel exists in the first place. Because if it was black and white, there would be no need to like dissect or analyze evil, right? Because it would just be a cut and dry affair. But it's really not. And the world is much more complicated than you probably think it is. And again, people are now fiction. I deal with fictional characters mostly on my channel, and there are monstrously evil people out there. But on the whole, most people are not evil monsters. Um, oh boy, I just lost my train of thought. I had a good point here. Um,
Most people are not evil monsters.
yeah, and evil's black, not black and white. Hold on, I had it. It'll come back. Oh, and especially um, if more often than not, when you're looking at an evil person, you'll find out that they've turned to evil because of some sort of horrific thing that's happened in their lives. You know, a good example would be most serial killers, if not all serial killers, were abused in some way when they were younger or experienced some kind of trauma that caused them to then develop into these horrible people, you know. Um, so I guess the biggest thing I've learned is that empathy is king. You know, treating others how you want to be treated is probably the most important thing in this world. And to end evil is to just focus on ending suffering and loving each other more. You know, if parents didn't abuse their children, a lot of the evil people, a lot of evil wouldn't occur in this world. That's one example. You know what I mean? If we took better care of our streets and our communities, a lot of evil wouldn't happen. A lot of people wouldn't grow up in these horrible environments, and they wouldn't turn to crime and all sorts of other things. You know, um, so I think that's the most important thing I've learned is that empathy is probably the truest path towards eliminating a lot of evil in the world, um, and that it all starts at home, I guess you could say. You know, and around you with the people around you. And if you treat people well, it turns out they'll turn out pretty good. You know, and things will go pretty well for you and for them. So I'd say that would be the most important thing that I've learned.
And that's a great place to end off. It's motivating as hell for sure. At least for me. And you know what? Look, I'm glad I got to have you on a second time after many, many delays. We finally got it done.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's all good.
It's
Yeah.
been a little crazy over here lately, but yes, I was glad to be back on.
All right. Yeah, no, it's no problem. All right. I'm gonna stop recording now. And we'll talk like for a second after the show because I do have to go. But
Sounds good.
all right.
Thank you so much for having